born of ignorance and fed by the fear which grows when ignorance is allowed to proliferate and to raise its voice as a authoritative voice in the world. Of course, everyone wants happiness. Everyone wants to be happy, everyone wants to live well, but ignorance causes us to confuse what happiness really is. And so sometimes we think that the greed is a path toward happiness, or that racism and oppression is a pathway for us to happiness, or that religious supremacism, thinking that we're better than others just because we speak a different religious language, or that we have certain beliefs, and yet we behave in inhumane and nasty ways to one another. We turn our religion, as the Quran says, into a lie in so many ways. This supremacism is an expression of ignorance. And of course, people think that violence will lead to a place of happiness. And it's all born of ignorance. I can remember once in my studies in Jordan, I came in from the airport and the taxi driver was asking me, so how come you speak such good Arabic? Are you CIA? No? Are you married? And if you're married, how many children do you have? And if I don't have any children, what's the problem, brother? You know? Like all these questions. How much money do you make? Do you know anyone at the US Embassy? I can get a visa from. All the questions that come every time. And this particular brother had just come back from, and I'm a little older than I look maybe, although my beard is starting to show it. He had just come back from jihad in Afghanistan, fighting the Soviets, back before some of you were probably even born. But I was already a budding young adult and back in the Middle East for research and studies. And I said, wow, you just came back from fighting the Soviets in Afghanistan. How was that? Oh, alhamdulillah, it was wonderful. And they ended up, running away and going back to, and I said, but brother, the news now from Afghanistan is very sad. What news? I said, I hear on the news now, like on the BBC, that the Muslims are starting to fight each other. Killing each other. And he said, no, brother, there's no war between the Muslims. He says, the war now is just between the Muslims and the Shia. and I said, what do you know about the Shia? And of course, he knew nothing about the Shia other than they couldn't be Muslims. Right? I've had so many conversations like this where we say things in absolute ignorance and place ourselves on thrones of judgment over others without knowing anything about who they are. Another brother, I was getting a haircut in another part of the Middle East, and the brother getting his haircut next to me was talking about the Hindus. And that they do this, they do that. I said, wow, it sounds like you must have studied Hinduism. Astaghfirullah, why would I waste time studying it? But you must have known Hindus or lived in India. Astaghfirullah, why would I do that? But he was so certain. And I said, brother, tell me what someone who has no understanding of our faith, if they're looking at the Kaaba and at the Haram in Mecca, seeing us go around a black box in the desert, crying, weeping, trying to touch a black stone, what would they think with no understanding? They're a bunch of rock worshippers in the desert. Astaghfirullah, how can you say that? I said, brother, this is what judging with no understanding looks like. And if we're going to do it to others, trust me, they will feel entitled and licensed to do it to us. Kabir, one of our great poets from India, says that the Hindu calls out to God and says, "Oh Ram," and then the Muslim calls out to God and says, "Oh Rahim," and then they kill each other. Kabir says nobody understands the secret. And the secret is that our religion is not a religion of ignorance. In fact, Al-Islam, as you know, we call it Din al-Haq, a religion of truth. And the period in Arabia prior to the rise of Islam, what do we call it? Al-Jahiliyyah, the age of ignorance. And it doesn't mean that the Arabs of that time didn't know how to do things. They were very smart in many ways. And even they had some virtues. You know, their old pre-Islamic sort of list of virtues, including, honor and treating hospitality. So it wasn't that they were completely barbaric. But the idea is that the antithesis of Islam is not someone going to a church to worship God according to their understanding, or someone going to a synagogue to worship God according to their understanding, or someone accepting hadiths that come to us through the Prophet's family as opposed to the Sunni collection. The antithesis of Islam is ignorance. The opposite of Islam is ignorance. We are a religion of knowledge. So what is the key to our revival as a community, as an ummah? What is the key to saving the planet, and not only our species, but all the other species with whom we share this planet? What is the key for ending war and violence? I remind myself and I remind you that the answer can only be education. And I do not mean just information. I mean an education which embraces holistic transformation, changing people, changing ourselves as its core characteristic. Holistic transformation. You know, the word education comes from the Greek, and it has two parts, a prefix and a main root. It means to lead out. Educo means to lead someone out of darkness. And if we can take this all the way back to Plato, Aflaton Billahi, as the people, Muslim philosophers called him, the divine Plato. But Plato gave us a parable or a metaphor of a cave, that humans were trapped in a cave, trapped in darkness, and all they could see were shadows on the wall from a fire which they couldn't even see behind them. And the word educate comes from the idea that the philosopher, for Plato, the philosopher is the one who turns around and says, oh, there's a fire behind us, creating shadows. I wonder what's behind the fire. And he goes until he finally exits the cave and he sees that there's a world of light and color and beauty. And then his dilemma is, do I stay up here where it's so nice, or do I go back into the cave and try to get people, try to liberate people? And so he goes back into the cave, and of course the inhabitants of the cave think he's crazy. He's a madman, talking about things that are outside of their experience, and encouraging them to come out of the cave and to leave their bondage. And most people refuse. Our concept of prophecy takes this to a whole other level. So when we talk about education, when we talk about God and the messengers, may God's blessings and peace be upon them all, we're talking about the supreme educators of humanity. In Surah Al-Baqarah, we read that God is the guardian or the wali of the believers. And He takes them out of the dhulumat, the darknesses, and brings them into the light. Iduko, leading out of darkness and into the light. Revelation is about educating humankind. We understand that light in this passage and in other passages like it, light is singular, nur, because God is one, and God is the nur samawati wal ard. And Imam Ghazali also says that wherever the Quran is referring to light, it also means knowledge. One way to read that or decode that Quranic language is to read knowledge. And so the idea is that we are taken out of the darknesses, the stuff that we make, the traps that we set for each other, the traps that we set for ourselves, the traps that other people set for us. And all of these false notions of happiness, all of these false notions of self, all of that because of my gender somehow I'm better than someone else, because of the color of my skin, or because of the fact that I grew up in a particular religion makes me superior to someone else, or because I come from a family of money, then it makes me better than someone else. All of these false darknesses is what God is calling us out of. And so when it says, and we read in the Quran that we should answer God and the prophets when they call us to that which gives life, they are calling us to knowledge. They are calling us to light. So in our tradition then, By education, we mean a process of holistic, total transformation. And even a better word, I think, than transformation is restoration. Because we were created in the most beautiful of all possible forms. All of us. And then we lost it. And it doesn't matter whose fault it was, we were cast out of that idea of a garden, that idea of being in that most beautiful of possible forms. And now we're in that world between the gardens where we are promised another garden and we're told about a garden that we don't remember. But we're in this world between the gardens where we are struggling with that asfala safilin, where human beings are the worst of the worst. We do things that the animals themselves would never dream of doing. We do it to each other. We do it to ourselves. And so when we talk about education as a mechanism for the transformation of the human being, we mean a mechanism for the restoration of that human being as a theocentric being. The heart is like the Kaaba. It only works when it's empty. That has to be God's place. That has to be God's. We can still love coffee, as I do. We can still love Turkish breakfast, which I do. And some of my fondest memories from the 2013, my previous chapter at the American Islamic College, was being in President Ali's house and having these wonderful, memorable Turkish breakfasts at your breakfast table. We can love those things, but we love them because they are part of the blessings that our Lord has ordained for us and has written for us. And so the heart has to be emptied, and part of this process of restorative, transformative education has to include the emptying of the heart of everything that is in competition with God. And so I know that we have a lot to talk about today, and so I don't want to make my comments long. But I just want to say that this education that we're talking about is not just theoretical, and it's not just informational. It is given to us as a way, an experiential path for our refinement, our ennoblement, our deepening, our restoration, the broadening of our mind and our heart to reality, which is always bigger than whatever today I think, feel, or believe. And so I'll just come to the close now, because I'm looking forward so much to learning from my fellow panelists. But let me just say that we should not, as a community, fear education. I have known shuyukh, and some of them I love, who have warned against university education, have warned against reading too many books. But I stand before you as a product of Catholic education. I was blessed to have grown up in a Catholic family where my first Arabic was taught to me by a Jewish teacher whose job it was to teach Spanish, and I didn't even take Spanish. I studied French with the beautiful Madame Lucas, and I don't regret that. But Lou Schoenberg, this Jewish teacher in my Catholic high school, said, I heard you're going to the Middle East with a priest next summer. So my first trip to the Middle East, into the Arab world, my first course in Islamic studies was from a priest who taught Islam not as a way of showing why Catholicism is better, but taught it in a way that he wanted us to understand how and why so many millions of people, hundreds of millions of people on the planet would find this beautiful and life-giving. He wanted us to appreciate and understand, not to judge. And so Lou said, yeah, if you were interested in learning Arabic, he says, I minored in Arabic at college, so I'd be happy to teach you. So I would go in the early mornings at Central Catholic High School in Portland, Oregon, to learn Arabic, my first Arabic, with a Jewish teacher who loved Arabic. And so when I landed on the streets of Cairo in 1982 at 17 years old, 1982 was a terrible year in the Middle East. Terrible things happened. But I was young and oblivious. I didn't know very much about Middle Eastern politics, but I had about 100 words and phrases of Arabic because of a Jewish teacher in my Catholic high school. And I was there in the Middle East with a Catholic priest who wanted to open our minds and hearts by taking us to a part of the world that would be absolutely new. And as a boy, we sang in church this hymn that is based upon a book in the Hebrew Bible. The hymn said, "Here I am, Lord. It is I, Lord. I have heard you calling in the night. I will go, Lord, if you lead me. I will hold your people in my heart." So in 1982, I'm 17, Catholic, thinking about the priesthood, thinking about even the monastery, because I'd already spent a lot of time in the monastery. I was a more serious teenager than I am as an adult. And I saw these people. It was Ramadan, 1982. It was boiling hot, 120 degrees. We were drinking water like we couldn't get enough, and they were fasting. And you know, Ramadan, even for Muslims who don't normally pray, it's like, maybe this year I'll get my groove back. So Muslims were really practicing around us. And I noticed that, you know, the first call to prayer in the morning, and it reminded me of the monks, whose first prayer of the day is in the darkness of the pre-dawn, when they shuffle into the church. And one of them says, "Oh Lord, open my lips," and then they all sing, "that my mouth may declare your praise." So I thought, this is like the monastery. Then at noon, just like the monks, everybody was gathered to pray again. And then in the mid-afternoon, at sunset, at night, and I said, you know, this is just like the monastery. But it's for everybody. It's for old people, young people, business people, everybody. Like this whole society has been reshaped around God, the remembrance of God. The remembrance of the fact that we are not here to stay. We're passing through. And that we are all returning to God. And so, I am a Muslim today because of the fearless education that was made available to me as a Catholic. And I want to say to my community, my ummah, that we should never ever fear education. Islam is so beautiful. We may become angry at the Muslims. And there are lots of days when we're angry at the Muslims because they're not living up to the prophetic ideals of this beautiful faith. But we are angry because we are outraged by the betrayal of this beautiful faith by people who are doing terrible things in the name of this faith. Education is the only way that we will rediscover what this religion is about. Education is the only way that we will set right other people's ideas about what our faith really is about, what we really believe and how we really live. Education is the only way we are going to overcome this virus or overcome climate change. Education is the only way we are going to quell, to smother the fires of war. I'm sure you've all read that in Russia right now, there's no Facebook, there's no access to information from outside sources, because violence feeds on ignorance. Our call is not to become an ignorant community. Our call is not to be an insular community. The Prophet ﷺ was sent as a token of God's love and God's mercy to everyone and to everything, and he was a teacher above all else. So speaking about the importance of education for the Muslim youth, and not just the Muslim youth, but all of us, we are all not finished. We are all still in process. We are all still learning because God is great and there's no way that I will learn it all in my lifetime. So I should live as if I am in a room now of my teachers. I should live in a constant quest for learning, a constant quest to be corrected if I've been wrong, and I've made lots of stupid mistakes in my life, but a constant quest to be more and to be better, because my path, my journey to God is also a journey to the Timothy that God created me to be in the first place. So let's stand. If we stand for anything, my sisters and brothers, let's stand for education. Let's stand for knowledge. Let's stand for the saving, the rescuing of our planet, and the rescuing of the human family. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah. And I bear witness that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a servant of his messenger. I thank Allah for this deen of al-Islam. I thank Allah for calling me to the field of education. As a teenager, believe it or not, I knew that my journey was going to be spent in schools at a very early age, although I didn't tell anyone. You don't tell anyone at 15 you want to be a teacher, you want to get beat up, right? You want to call you a nerd and put you out the cool club. But I knew that this is what I wanted to do. And so when I hear Dr. Tim talk about the transformational power of education, that deeply resonates with me, not because I read about it in a book or I heard someone tell a story about education and how it changed their life. It resonates with me because I personally can bear witness and attest to and testify to the power of education. So I grew up on the southeast side of Chicago. I refer to myself as a 90s baby because I spent my teenage years in the 1990s at the height of crime and violence and gangs in Chicago. And I was born to a Christian mother and father and raised in a household where we went to church. Not every Sunday, but we went to church. That was sort of my faith foundation early in my life. My first exposure to Islam wasn't in a masjid or a mosque or a temple. It was actually on the streets of Chicago, where there was a street gang in my neighborhood that had started to adopt some of the symbols and some of the sayings that we associate with al-Islam. And there was something about listening to those brothers talk. It was something about the symbols that they were graffitiing on garage doors that piqued my interest. And so my journey to Islam began as I began to search out, well, what do those things really mean? What does a crescent moon and a star really mean? What does it mean to hold your hand up and then put your hand over your heart? What does that really mean? And so I began to research and to gain a deeper understanding of these symbols. And that took me down a different path where I began to read the speeches and the writings of Malcolm X. And because I came from a family where even though my mom and dad went to church, they were willing to allow me to find my own way and to forge my own path, they allowed me to research Islam even more. And so I thank Allah for this deen, because what it did was it opened up my eyes, it opened up my heart to experiences and new knowledge that I would have never had access to if not because of Islam. Dr. Tim opened up in his opening dua asking Allah to bless the oppressed and the marginalized communities that we know are so predominant in our society today. And he laid out very clearly some of the calamities that we are dealing with in our world. He talked about the climate crises and racial divide and this pandemic that's been the backdrop of our lives for the last 2 years. He talked about the corrupt governments that are popping up all over the world. A question that we have to ask ourselves as educators is, what role do we as educators play in combating this harsh reality of this world that we are now living in? And to be more specific, what is our responsibility when it comes to growing and developing the hearts and the minds of the young people that we are charged with? Because everything that our children today are exposed to pulls them further away from Islam. It pulls them further away from any faith. Every time you turn on the television, they're exposed to debauchery and sin and negative images that pulls them further away. So how do we begin to reimagine schools in a way that can confront the bombardment of negativity that they see every day? How many of us in this room are raising children? Raise your hand if you're raising children. You know how hard it is to keep your children safe, just physically safe, right? That's our predominant concern. I'm raising 3 African American boys on the south side of Chicago, so you understand, I hope at least, you understand what I pray for every day. Their safety, their physical safety. Because all around us is chaos and confusion, so I'm trying to keep my boys on a straight path. But everything that they see outside the household say, no, step off the straight path, brother. Come down this path. How do we as educators, as those who are raising children, ensure that our children remain committed to faith, remain committed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How do we reimagine our schools in a way that gives them the armor that they need to face their harsh realities that they face every day when they walk outside of our homes? But how do we create spaces, though, where our children feel safe to fail and to not be perfect? I know so many young people that are unmosqued. They're not going anywhere on Fridays. They disconnected. They feel judged, they feel put upon, they feel like failures, they feel like if they make a mistake, then everything is lost. How do we create spaces where we protect our children, but also allow them to grow and to be children? And to make the mistakes that we made growing up. Every day is a battle for the hearts and the minds of our children. And our schools, while that is the formal place that education is supposed to take place, we have to realize that education doesn't just happen in our schools. For most of us, our first teachers were our mothers. So how do we create spaces in our homes where we are affirming the identities of our young people, giving them the tools that they need to navigate society, and making them feel good about who they are, and helping them to understand that, hey, there is no there, we're always growing. We're always learning. We're always pushing forward. We're always trying to find ways to overcome the obstacles that are before us. How do we make our young people feel loved, regardless of the mistakes that they make? In the work that I've done over the last 25 years, I spent most of my time working in marginalized, oppressed communities. And that was by choice. That was by choice. I worked in Inglewood for most of my career. I worked on the west side of Chicago. I worked on the south side of Chicago. Why? Because I felt like that's where my talents and my skills are going to be leveraged the most. And I would have the greatest amount of impact. But the problem is today is that we are still educating our children as if it's 1885. If I showed you a picture of a classroom in 1870 and I showed you a picture of a classroom today, they look unfortunately very similar. Desks and rows. Teacher stands up in front of the classroom. Teacher's owner of the knowledge. Kids sit down, shut up, and listen. Let me impart this knowledge on you. Be quiet, I don't care about your experiences. As we think about what we're confronting in this society today, our kids are stressed out and overwhelmed. There's never been a time in our country's history where we've had the amount of students struggling with depression. Social media is a big reason why that is. The fake world of social media, where nobody's good enough, and everybody's competing to have to one-up each other. You couple that with the reality that we have students who are struggling with isolation, social isolation, because they haven't been in schools in 2.5 years. And then you stir that up. And then you add the pandemic. And then you add the war in the Ukraine. And then you add abject poverty. And what you have is this perfect soup of depression and hopelessness. So what does a school do to confront that? Well, one, we have to start doing things different. We have to reimagine and redesign the way our schools are constructed. We have to stop putting all of the onus for owning the knowledge of teaching on teachers. We have to start celebrating and acknowledging the experiences that our students are bringing to the table. We have to affirm what they already know and the experiences they've already had. We have to stop being trapped by this archaic way that we structure education. Why do kids have to be in school 6-8 hours a day? Why do they have to only come to the physical building to learn? Why are we only teaching them the history of certain people and the contributions of certain people and certain races and certain ethnicities? People like to say that education is an apolitical process. In fact, it is a very political process. Teaching in and of itself is a political act. When you decide what gets taught and what doesn't get taught, you are making a political decision. So how do we leverage our schools? How do we leverage our curriculum? How do we leverage opportunities to teach and learn and to shape the lives of young people, to tell them the true stories of not just the people that we are comfortable with, but all folks? How do we celebrate the contributions of women? How do we celebrate the contributions of African Americans, of Latinx folks, of Indians, of folks from Turkey? Those stories don't get told. They don't get told. So when Dr. Tim talks about ignorance and how you can have hatred for somebody that you don't even know, that you've never even interacted with, that's because those stories weren't told. It's why when I go to certain communities and I give the salams, I don't get the salam back because I'm not Muslim enough. Because I don't speak Arabic. It's because the stories aren't told. Because we're not using our educational spaces to break down barriers. What we're using education to do is to refine those barriers. So when I come through the American public education system, I believe what most folks have always believed, that people of color are second-class citizens. That if you don't speak Arabic, you're not Muslim enough. That if you don't have a Muslim name, you shouldn't be invited to the Muslim gathering. Because we aren't using these opportunities to break down the walls and to realize that, hey, we got so much more in common than we do different from one another. But we don't use our educational spaces to do that. We use education to maintain status quo. And that's not what education is supposed to be. It was never supposed to be that. It was supposed to be a place where we problematize our ways of thinking and being and doing. So we come out of there better people, more informed people, more enlightened people. That's what Islam did for me. It made me more enlightened. It made me more enlightened. Dr. Tim said, hey, Islam is not a religion of ignorance. But you know what it is? It's a religion of justice. But we're not using our spaces to build social justice warriors. We're not using our spaces and arming our people with the tools that they need, our young people to walk out and say, no, that's injustice, and as a Muslim, I reject that. Regardless of who's the victim of the injustice. We have to start reshaping and reframing how we do school, how we do education, how we empower our young people to take control of their educational lives, to make them feel good about being in our presence, being in our schools, affirming their experiences, and say, hey, even though what you're going through now, I never went through, even though you got on those skinny jeans, and I think they look horrible, even though that music you listen to is awful, I can't even understand what even though those things will make up their experiences, I gotta validate that. I gotta use that as an entry point. Yeah, you listen to Lil Boozy or whoever it is, okay, cool. Let me go find Lil Boozy's tape. They don't even make tapes no more.
You know, I have to Tupac and J. Cole.
Right, whatever it is. I can't even think of the most popular artist. G Herbo, whatever his name is. We so quick to judge though. Oh, that means that's not Islam. But if I can use G Herbo to implant Islam in a young person's life, then alhamdulillah. But that's what we should be doing in our schools. We should be making young people feel good about themselves. When I was CAO, and I'm gonna stop talking, when I was CAO of Urban Prep, all of our students were African American males. These young brothers have been forgotten about. When we started the school, when the school started in 2006, only 2.5% of African American males who graduated from a Chicago public school was gonna earn a college degree. 2.5%. In 2006, this isn't Jim Crow South America, this is Chicago in 2006, and less than 3 out of 100 African American boys were going to earn a college degree. That's what we're dealing with. Right? And so we talk about the work that we should be using our schools for. It is rooted in justice. And even though maybe a smattering, maybe a small handful of those young men that we worked with back in 2006, I was there from 2006 to 2018, excuse me. And even though just a smattering of those young men were Muslim, it didn't matter. Because we were fighting oppression. We were fighting against a system that is designed to keep people of color, in particular African American males, in a position of subjugation and oppression. And so as a Muslim, it is my responsibility to fight the fight. That in and of itself is a jihad. What we're fighting against in this country, to empower people of color, to empower women, to empower the voiceless, to empower those who never get an opportunity to be their full authentic selves. People who feel like they have to diminish themselves. That's how our young people feel. They have to diminish themselves when they get in our presence. They don't feel good enough. And that's unfortunate. So as we think about education, as we think about what the future of education holds, I want you all to have a deep understanding of the transformational power of education. And again, this is not something that I read in a book. This is something that I can bear witness to personally. I am not here. Whatever credentials that I've been able to amass with the blessings of Allah, it's only because of the power of the educational experiences that I've had. Thank you so much.
Talk really briefly and give a little background about the work that I'm doing, and then we definitely want to open up the discussion to the audience. So I think our two speakers here really did an amazing job of laying out the situation we're in, the problem that we're at, and so hopefully what I'm doing addresses a little bit more of the solution. So I'll give you a little background about where I got to, how I got to this point, and then talk about the work that we're doing now in the organization that I'm in. So as a former teacher, an instructional leader, director of technology, and now in education consulting, I have been working with not only education, but technology. And that's the last piece that I'm going to be bringing into the conversation, because we've talked about spirituality, and we talked about using education in a transformative way. But how will technology serve in that role, and how as Muslims can we be less fearful of technology and open ourselves up to allowing our students to go down that path as well. So, I worked in areas that were high socioeconomic areas with a high Muslim population, and I have also now working with traditionally underserved communities where we don't have the funding available. So I've seen the entire spectrum. Lots of it does come down to money, and so that's something that we're not going to solve in this room. But what I do want to talk about is how, as Muslim parents, I need you to realize what is happening in education and how underrepresented Muslims are. Traditionally, Muslims have wanted to have financial security, so that we direct our children into specific career paths. But what that has led to is, when I'm having an all-white meeting in my organization, there's only one Muslim. There's only one Muslim woman. There's only one Muslim woman wearing hijab, and that's all me, right? And in my organization, which was its digital promise, it was launched by the Obama administration, and our CEO is the former superintendent of CPS, Jean-Claude. We are going into those urban school districts, underserved communities, people of color, and trying to get funding, technology into the hands of students. So, and our CEO works really hard. We just received a huge grant from Kellogg, which now we are taking to Haiti. So we're going international now to help transform some of those educational concerns and problems that other nations are having. So I'll tell you what I have seen with the Muslims, right? As a former director of technology, I have had to call parents into my office, and I was just discussing this with at my table, and I have had to say that, your child did something not appropriate, sent an inappropriate picture to a girl, and it was caught, right? And, we have to discuss the consequences. And I know how the parents would react. No, my child didn't do it, or once they realize they did, I'm just gonna cut him off from all technology, right? But once that happens, the child is even more isolated. The child is isolated from their circles and is actually isolated from education. Because the only way to educate yourself these days is not with one, not with two, but maybe 3 devices. And those devices need to be LTE enabled because you need internet connectivity. And that's what we try to do. So knowing that, I'll give you an example of a school that's one of our clients. I was in an urban area, and we received applications from schools to become part of our program, so they could get the funding from us and get all of that technology from us. And it was amazing because it was an area where I wouldn't expect this. But anytime I'm traveling for work, obviously one of my concerns is always prayer. When am I going to make prayer time? Where am I going to pray? Is it all going to work out? And my colleagues who are non-Muslim know that, and so they're always cognizant of that. So we're going to visit all these schools that have applied to become part of, to receive the funding from our organization. And I walk in, and this was one of those times where my colleague knew I was kind of concerned about my prayer. I walk in, and the tour of that school was going to be given by a Muslim student who was wearing hijab, and I immediately felt, relief that okay, she's going to help me find a place to pray. So I said to her, where can I pray? And she said, well, which room do you want? We have several prayer rooms. This is a public school in Milwaukee urban area. And I looked around, and there were kids wearing their traditional clothing. And and traditional Pakistani clothing, kids in thobes and everything, right? And I thought, wow, okay, so, and my colleague looked at me and he said, you have to accept this school. Do you see what's happening here? This is your people. You're gonna have to accept this school into the program. And I thought, oh my, great. So now I'm going to have hundreds of Muslim parents mad at me because I provided their child with more technology, LTE-enabled technology, and I'm going to have to answer to these parents of why my child is always on their computer, right? But here I am to tell you that education technology is being used in transformative ways. So in my organization, we do research on computational thinking, artificial intelligence, and how to bring that down to a K-12 level. How do we bring that down into our digital teaching and learning? So all that research is happening, and my organization is funded by Zuckerberg, Gates, Dell Foundation, Kellogg, the big guys, right? They're funding this. And it's going to all of these students in these areas, but here we are as Muslim parents afraid of that technology. So what happens when our students are going into the medical field, but here I am talking about artificial intelligence and computational thinking, and there is no Muslim representation in that research. And there's no women in that research, and there's no women of color in that research, right? So that's what happens when we have made up our minds about what education should look like and what success looks like. When we have predetermined those notions, then we are isolating our communities from other areas that could transform our societies. In schools, what we have done is we go in and we bring in more technology, and we bring these walled gardens, as we call them, where we allow students to make mistakes. We want the students to go ahead and make a mistake under the watchful eyes of educators so that we could tell them what are the best practices, what's good for time management, what's good for executive functioning skills. And your students are competing with children who are being taught to use technology 24/7 and how to use it in a collaborative way, how to communicate, how to be creative in it. And the way that we are going to allow ourselves not to be scared of technology is if we allow our students to be the creators of content, not the consumers of content. And if Muslims aren't the creators of content, then what does that content look like? So again, here I am telling you, don't be afraid of education and don't be afraid of technology, because everything is going towards that way. And so I really, just want to give you that background, and I know because we're kind of running out of time, definitely want to open it up the discussion and kind of hear from all of you and what your perspectives are, and so we'd be able to address it. That sounds good. Yeah.
Thank you so much for our panelists and their discussion. But before we move on, I just want to show one little thing. You're going to be seeing these flyers on your table, and this is a program that's launching this Ramadan, and there are around 500 Turkish families, and they're going to be hosting iftars. And if you want to be matched with a Turkish family and be hosted for Turkish iftar, which I recommend, you can put in your information, your name, your email, and your phone number, and then these will be collected at the end of the event. Thank you. Now we can open the floor for discussions. Yes.
Yes, I'm Rais Yawar. I'm the president of the Board of Commissioners for Streamwood. And I basically went into politics because I figured that Muslims needed a voice and a seat at the table. And I'm the first Muslim to be the president of a board. I want to thank Brother Ali and the whole organizers and everyone for inviting us here and putting this fabulous brunch together. And I want everyone to give a round of applause to our learned speakers who did an amazing job. It's a question and a comment. I personally believe that children learn from example. So the parents and the teachers should instill love for others, not hatred and envy. So if they watch their parents or their teachers lying and they think it's a small lie, that's what they learn. I think I'm a better person today because my parents were good human beings. And they taught me not to hate Shias and Sunnis and Ismailis. There's a huge divide. Don't you all agree with that? Yes. And I just want to say, you talked about the attack in the masjid in Peshawar. That count's gone up to, I think, 56 and above. And it was a Shia mosque, that's why they attacked it, and they'd done it before. And the other thing I wanted to say is I like the fact that you talked about how important it is to be enlightened, not just learn. So what can we do, especially in Sunday schools, just getting the kids to be Hafiz-e-Quran and not learning and practicing what they are reading in the Quran. We have to teach them to be better human beings. I want your comments, please. Thank you.
So if I understand your question correctly, is how do we teach young people to be better human beings?
Yes.
Yeah, so there's a lot of research out there about the importance of teaching cultural competence, which is helping students to be able to relate to and engage with people from cultures and backgrounds that are different from theirs. And so it goes back to what I said just a few minutes ago about the importance of telling the stories of people who are often marginalized, right? So if you are in a community, for example, of an immigrant community, for example, then take time and be intentional about teaching the history and the stories of African American, Latinx people, women in the country, helping them to understand that the contributions that have made this country what it is just don't sit or are owned by just white folks, which is what's typically taught in schools, right? So it starts there. It starts with exposing them to the narratives of folks that are different from them so they can begin to develop an appreciation for other cultures. And so when they interact with those people, they don't treat them like less than or others. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Can we have the next person actually come up to the podium, if that's okay?
And while you're coming up to the podium, just please come up. I just wanted to reinforce that, the idea of these powerful stories. I just learned the other day I was spending an evening with someone who had the privilege of knowing, Honorable Elijah Mohammad, personally. And the question came up about fasting in December. And she had an opportunity, just because she knew him well, to just ask him, like, I thought Ramadan was, back, a couple months ago when it's on the lunar cycle. And Elijah Muhammad just said to her, sister, just tell me, how do you think I'm going to get my community, right, to go from absolute, enslavement and debauchery to a place of fasting and God-fearing? Do you think that they're just going to switch overnight and all of a sudden it's going to be Ramadan in the lunar schedule? He says, how do you think I'm going to get my community to fast and to pray and to live a godly life? It's going to take some steps, some intermediation. And when she told me that story, I was in awe of the fact that and again, I mean, people can agree or disagree, but the idea is that that innovation, if we can call it that, was for the sake, in the service of mercy, and in the service of transformation, and in the service of providing some kind of middle step, right? Between an extreme place of enslavement and poverty and all the problems that come with that, in a system that was designed to keep that whole community down, poor and oppressed, and deprived of intellectual transformation, all of that, and to bring them up. And I have to say that narrative context, I was talking with Dr. Mahan about this slightly earlier today, but that narrative context, that story, just made the whole world of difference to me. And I think we need more of these stories in order for us to view one another with a sense of empathy and understanding and solidarity and compassion. And so I just want to reinforce that. And I also want to say that I'm filled with the desire to be a student of both of these people on the panel with me. So.
I'll just quickly address your question. Having served as the curriculum chair for Islamic Center of Naperville and then being on the board of Islamic School Carriers of Light, I kind of wanted to just offer some practical responses to what you're asking. I think that our Sunday schools, when they become just a 6th full day of school for our children, it does become difficult for them to keep their focus. So we have to meet them where they're at. Like we were saying, previously, keeping their interests in mind. It has to be infused with civics and service, volunteer work, to keep the students' interest and allow it to be experiential. So infuse the programming with experiences that allow them to practice what is being preached, right? The traditional problem we've seen with Sunday school is that the parents wait in the car and the kids are praying inside and the parents don't even come inside to pray. So we have to become role models for our children and allow them to have those experiences in real life, for them to experience Sunday school as something other than another 6th full day of school, basically.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Khalid Siddiqui. I'm actually not from Chicago area. I'm from Rockford, Illinois. And this is I think I had the best decision to join this meeting. I learned in just last hour. Very good. And actually, I thank speakers to point the real problem. I have a question for both of them. I know every community have the Sunday school, and our community actually decided to be in Rockford in 1998 to start Islamic school. So we have Islamic school, in Rockford area, which is a very remote area, and it's almost, it's been over 20 years. We have the school and we have Sunday school. And as a, what do you call, the promoter of the school, we're working at that community. I think we have failed to communicate this information and education in our Islamic schools too. And unfortunately, even we try to do whatever we can do, mission statement, telling the teacher, we unfortunately fail to deliver, even in Islamic school, the education, the real essence of the Islam. We, what our guys say is 100% accurate. We need to educate ourselves. We don't want to have just some stereotype Muslim or another Muslim school. Unfortunately, most of the Islamic school are just a Muslim school. Is not giving. I want to ask you guys, with all, we have Sunday school and Islamic school, what we can do in the school where we are in charge to deliver the education, to deliver that information, to transform that schools to make the Muslims which have a heart in Islam, just not graduated from this Islamic school and going to the big universities. Their focus, I think, have to be changed. And unfortunately, I'm standing here after 22 years of having Islamic school full-time in the Rockford, Illinois. We're struggling with financial, but we cannot deliver. I have to say that I am failed to deliver that statement you told us, like to educate, to make them really understand what Islam is all about. Can you advise us? Tell us what we have to do when we're running the Sunday school, when we're running the Islamic school, and what are the resources we can get and have infused in the teachers and the principal and the administration of that school, that how we can achieve the goal. If we cannot achieve the goal where we have full control, how we can going to change the community? Jazakallah.
Well, fail is a strong word, so I do, I understand the passion that you're speaking with, and I think that I appreciate that, and we need that passion for us to continue the work. It's not going to be a simple work, but I think that the first generation of Muslims, the majority of us probably started here in the 80s. And so now we're at the point where our children are going to learn from our mistakes. So I would say that, first of all, there were many successes probably, and maybe you aren't aware of them, and you are going to move it forward. I think what's going to happen is that the next generation will just have to learn from us and work on how to assimilate better, how to represent better, how to, within Muslim communities, always have diversity, equality, and inclusion in the back of our minds whenever we design anything, so that we don't think that, well, we're just Pakistani Muslims and those issues are for Black Muslims, and that's not my problem. And I think the next generation is doing that. I think we are getting better. We're not there yet. But I would say that to you, your work has laid that foundation, and our next generation is going to carry it on.
So I would add, and this doesn't just apply to Muslim schools. It applies to all educational institutions. And you have to start with, do the students in those schools understand why they are there? What is the purpose of school? Do they understand that? Can they communicate that to you? When I was a principal, I would do classroom observations, and I would go, and the first question that I would ask would be of the student. It was, what are you learning and why are you learning it? If they can't answer that, that means the teacher hasn't set the purpose for that lesson. If students in the Islamic school can't answer why they are there, what they're supposed to be getting smarter about, what they're supposed to be getting better at, then we haven't done a good job of informing them about the purpose of the objective of the school. The second thing that I'll say is, and it's already been said, you have to start with student interest. Right? We want them to fully invest, not buy in, but invest mentally and intellectually and emotionally in the educative process. Then the only way to do that is by finding out what they're interested in. So what we have is a bunch of schools with students in them who are engaged in mindless devotional obedience. I'm just here. I'm here because mom and dad paid tuition, I have to be here. But they aren't actively engaged in learning because the learning doesn't represent their interests, doesn't represent who they are. So if we aren't willing to do that, then we'll continue to get what we always have forgotten, which is schools full of disengaged kids who get the stamp of legitimacy placed upon them once they graduate, but have not really learned and aren't critical thinkers.
It's hard to add to this, but I just want to, reflect an experience. So I've lived a good part of my life north of the border in Canada, and the province of Ontario has a motto: Ontario, yours to discover. And I've often reflected, this is the way we should be teaching Islam. We teach Islam as it's a prefabricated, sealed up, airtight system that gets imposed upon the youth, and their thinking, their contributions don't matter. The fact is that we are a human caravan of many, many generations, hundreds and hundreds of years, and we still are writing fresh commentaries on the Quran. We're still writing commentaries on the Hadith. We're still trying to figure out what it means for us to live in a diverse and pluralistic world. We're still working on it, and each one of us is still in process. And so that means that education is not, when we invite our youth into Islamic studies, we're inviting the next generation of scholars and leaders and paradigm-changing thinkers. And so they need to know that Islamic history is not just about the past, it's about what we're doing right now. And that they can make history. Now that's exciting, right? And also, another thing that brother you mentioned is you said, how do we teach the heart of Islam? I think that's a really important question, right? Okay, so before we talk about Arabic, why don't we talk about justice? That means a lot to big sectors of our community, right? Why don't we talk about equality? Why don't we talk about racial and socioeconomic inclusion? That's the heart of Islam. Why don't we talk about mercy? I mean, we talk so much about the sunnah, and it's the beard, and it's the high pants, and it's 20-year-olds using a cane even though their legs are perfectly good, and none of that is bad. But when the Quran distills the sunnah, it does it in a very powerful and challenging way. مَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We've sent you as nothing. This is like an absolute negation, except as a token of love and mercy to everyone and to everything. So before I become a poster boy for this religion, why don't I go home and try to be a mercy to my family? Why don't I try to be a mercy to a society that doesn't understand me and maybe doesn't like me? Why don't I try to be a mercy to the environment, in the way I consume, and the way I recycle, and the way I encourage other people to take care of this environment? And there's so much that we can talk about that isn't just about memorizing the Quran without any understanding. Now, I'm not saying that that's bad, because the Quran is also a sonic experience. So memorizing the Quran is a beautiful, beautiful thing, and it has a deep impact upon us, even when we don't understand the Arabic. I can remember hearing the adhan, even though it's not like purely Quran, hearing the adhan on the streets of Cairo at 17 for the first time, never imagining that one day that adhan would be calling me. Right? Wow. But even as a Catholic, I made sure after that first day in Cairo, I made sure that I was, in every subsequent trip to the Middle East afterwards, I made sure that I was up before the mu'adhin, and I had my coffee, and I was ready for the adhan, because I didn't want to miss it. So even Arabic without understanding can have an impact, and I think that needs to be recognized. But that's not the transformative power of Islam. The early Muslims were transformed because of the love and the mentoring of a man who saw in them not what they were, but what they could become. And we are not giving our children, and even as a father, failing is a strong word, but I have to acknowledge I've failed more than I've succeeded probably. I have not even given my own children enough of a sense that I see who they are. I see them on the horizon. I see who it is that God is calling them to be. And God is not calling for the enlisting of mindless drones to populate the mosques. We should be educating our children to be changers. And this religion is not finished, right? Islam, as it resides with God, is perfect and whole and pure. But what we're living is in process, because we're dealing with ourselves. We're dealing with an interpretation that has largely been interpreted by men for men. We have to, and we're not to dishonor them. But they had their time and they were rewarded for what they did, and now it's our time. And our eyes have been opened a little bit wider when it comes to certain issues that were invisible to them. So the time has come for our generation to rise up and to really, together, with God's help and blessings, write a new chapter of Islamic history that we will then pass to the next generation. And our kids need to know that Islam is theirs to discover.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Susan Labadi. I am a former Islamic school educator, administrator, educational consultant, and also Dr. Amen brain health trainer. I resonate with so much, so thank you. I immensely appreciated coming here. Again, it's like the first time in 2 years we've been out any place without a mask. And I wanted to mention to Rais and to share with you that when you've got mothers and fathers who are both working these days, you really do need to rely on the weekend Islamic school, and in many cases we know that they can be much better. And even my own children, of which I have 4 adult children, my husband will tell me stories from Palestine, and I say to him, why didn't you tell our kids these stories when they were with us? Because now they're all pretty much out of the house. The ability of parents to give their own kids their Islamic education, it needs to be filled in oftentimes by either full-time Islamic schools or by our weekend schools. And I wanted to share with you that I've been invited to join a new board that is addressing the need of weekend Islamic schools and after-school programs. It's called WISER, and it is now applying for its not-for-profit certification. So you might go to, I think they're working on the website right now, wiserusa.org. And the upcoming ISNA Education Forum that will be on May 13th through 15th. On the 13th, on Friday, there is a pre-conference that is devoted to the weekend Islamic schools. We are making the program right now. If you have any ideas of what you would like us to include, I would appreciate that you write to me and give me some feedback, because we are going to be doing this on Friday the 13th. We're encouraging 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock. Anybody who is involved with weekend Islamic schools to come to the pre-conference. My email is susan@susanlabadi.com, and I would really love to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Brother Lionel, Woodwood, UIC.
You guys see in the building.
I was an actor at UIC when I first moved to Chicago. My name is Rohani Nayan, and currently I'm the CEO of the Chicago Muslims Green Team, the first Muslims Green Team working on environmental my background, being a CEO, is very, very new to me. I consider myself as new to Chicago. I moved in 2014 to join my husband, Michael Thomas, who's a professor at UIC. Brother Lionel works very closely with him. Been trying to get him to get involved. But my background, I just wanted to give a little bit of my background so you know where I'm coming from. My bachelor's and master's in teaching English as a second language, which is something I love to do, teaching English. And my PhD is on, my dissertation title is Reading Jihad, looking at identity development and literacy practices of children of Muslim immigrants in the US. And that's why I didn't want to talk, because I tend to talk a lot, but then I thought what I have to say is pretty important. And so I said, here I am. Brother, mashallah, you're not a failure, brother, from Rockford. You are on the path of success, because the first part to finding a solution is acknowledging you have a problem. And you know what your problems are at in your community or your school. So that's a very good part. Because now you can move forward to finding the solutions and exploring. And no solutions is 100% 100% perfect. And this is one thing I think we Muslims tend to forget. And a lot of the time, I came to America in 1985. My mother was illiterate because grandfather didn't believe in educating women. And so my mother didn't know how to read or write. My mother taught me number 6 has a big bottom. Number 9 has a big head. And that was the literacy that I was exposed to. I was never read bedtime stories. And so that's why when I came to America, when I trained the teachers, especially white American teachers, how to teach literacy to children of immigrants, I emphasize on knowing the literacy. And literacy means the ability to understand signs and words and letters. And a lot of the time people think literacy is reading and writing. But now, there are many different literacies. Literacy is no longer one. And we Muslims, we tend to focus on giving intellectual literacy. You must know how to read, how to write, but we forget about the other literacies. So here, in all my work that I do, and especially in designing, I've designed Sunday school, weekend school, women's group, and everything else. I focus on 7 types of literacy. Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous here. The first one is spiritual literacy. And this is very important because this is where we taught God consciousness. Who is Allah? What are Allah's attributes? Why must we love Allah? I grew up whenever I asked a lot of questions as a child. And when I asked my ustazah, why did this happen? Why did Allah send Prophet Muhammad to the Arab and not to Malaysia? My ustazah always said, shut up, Rohani, you ask too many questions. She didn't know how to answer. And so in my teaching, I encourage my students, no question is stupid, no question is ridiculous, ask, because that's what the Quran wants us to do. Ask, and then iqra, read, so that you know the answer to your question. So instead of fearing of Allah, yes, we should fear Allah, but let's focus on the love of Allah. So God consciousness is important. Number 2, moral literacy. That is, and we need to teach this because a lot of the time we parents forget because we do it automatically. You get up, make your bed, brush your hair, brush your teeth, but we need to teach our children, why are we doing this? For health, and for this, for this, for this. So physical literacy, how to take care of ourselves is very important, how to talk to other people. And number 5, interpersonal literacy. Interpersonal literacy is very important because interpersonal means how to get along with other people and how to collaborate, how to work with people, with other Muslims, with non-Muslims, with atheists and all that. And number 6, cultural literacy. This is very important. Cultural literacy is faith in action. It's not enough to just read the Quran. Understand and all that. And that's what I enjoy at CMGT because now I'm teaching youth how to, one of the program I did was plant project, taking plastic bags that were recycled, we make it into plastic yarn, and we crochet it, make it into a mat. And then we distribute the sleeping mats to our neighbors who are houseless in Chicago. That was one of my sweetheart, and last year I also did Courage Project for the youth to find support, to make friends, and then find the courage to make a change, and especially to improve the world. And this year at CMGT we have tree planting initiative that we want to plant trees aside from all the others. And I'm done, almost done. And the last one is social literacy, how to be part of the community. And because I'm guilty of this too, we are now so deep into our electronics, and I'm not saying it's bad because I always believe that it's easy for us to blame social media, but social media also has the good stuff. And even though I didn't like TikTok that much, but my children, my students, and the people I deal with, they are learning from TikTok. My daughter this year learned 10 recipes from TikTok. And for Thanksgiving, and she cooked the recipes from TikTok. And so for everything that we have, like our sister here said, don't be afraid. There's always good, and so we must be ready to embrace the bad and the good, talk about it, and then make a decision. Because at the end of the day, Allah will ask us, I send you some resources, did you take it up? I gave you lots of books, I gave you internet, cell phone, you have everything in your phone, what did you do with it? We will be asked about this. So if you are interested to know what I do, and especially I love Sunday school, and in fact, we are now forming Green Team at Downtown Islamic Center, the first pilot project in Illinois. I'll be very happy to share the curriculum that I have and some tips that I have.
Thank you so much for your input. For the sake of time, if we can keep the discussion a bit shorter so we can get to as many people as we can.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mohammad. I'm a board member of Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition. I'm also a student of American Islamic College. I'm also a treasurer of the Nigerian Islamic Association. I have a question. I also teach Islamic studies. My question is, we are trying to teach the youth about modesty, enlighten them about Islam, teach them how to live a better life. But we have some parents who are against these things. How do we go about it? You teach these children how to be modest, how to eat right, the Islamic way, how to do everything right. Then when they go home, their parents tell them, oh, she's too religious, leave her, just forget about what she said. Or she's too modest, don't worry about it. The next thing they come to you and say, my mom said, or my dad said, my parents said. During this pandemic, I had parents calling me saying, oh, my children is in a big mess. She don't listen to me. She don't do what I tell her to do. I don't want to use the word they use. She is F up. I said, then why are you calling me? Then they tell me, oh, you used to teach them Islamic studies, things you tell them to do. And I said, but you are opposed to it. So what do we do in case like this? It's very hard. Because the parents are between the teachers and the children. So the children are confused, don't know what to do. So I need some advice. Thank you.
I'll take a stab at this. I worked in a community where we were trying to instill values, a love of education, ways of solving conflict and engaging in conflict resolution. We were trying to teach things that they weren't necessarily being exposed to in their household. And so there was oftentimes a tension between what we were trying to impart upon them and what they were learning, not just in their houses, but in their communities at large. And that's a real tension. But you can only focus on what you can control. And what you can control is what's happening in the situation that you're responsible for. So you can control what's happening in your school, you can control what's happening in your classroom, and as someone said this morning, I forgot what it was, you just have to be a model. You have to show through example. You have to show through actually living the things that you're saying. And you'll be surprised at how much of an influence you'll have over the way that young person is thinking, the way they engage, the way they behave. You might not see it right away, but down the road, as they begin to think about you and their teacher and the way you sort of modeled how to conduct yourself with modesty and humility, those lessons are being planted within them. You just might not see the evidence of that until a few years down the road. So my direct response to that is, don't worry about what's happening in their households. You be the example. You set the tone, right? And then you allow Allah to take care of the rest.
That's a very tough question, but the only thing I could add to that is that part of any program that we design, there are some crucial parts that need to be included in that design, in that program. A communication plan would be one of them. How are you going to communicate to all your stakeholders what you're about to do? your transformation plan. So what is it that you're actually trying to do? That has to be a component of the program. But one of those components has to be family engagement. And so you do have to get the buy-in from the parents as early as possible in launching that program. You have to involve them and really make them feel like they're part of the success of the program. Communicate to them what you're trying to do. Get them involved in the program itself by being volunteers. If they feel like they're part of the success of it, they'll be more invested in the success of it, and they'll understand what it is that you're trying to accomplish. If your communication plan is basically flyers that go in backpacks that never make it home, then you are disengaged with the parents. And you're disengaged with the part of your program that your children are exposed to more, which is their home, than you. And that will be a huge obstacle to your success. So one of those components has to be family engagement, and that has to be from the get-go.
Can I just add something really quickly? I just want to say, though, that a lack of parental involvement is not justification for the failure of those children. Right? A lot of times when we say, oh, the parents aren't involved, they don't care, and therefore we don't have to provide the best educational experience for those students, I want to make sure that we don't fall into that trap, because parents aren't engaged for a lot of different reasons that has nothing to do with how they really feel about education. Right? There's a lot of things that got work and other responsibilities, so we just want to be careful that even if we don't have parents that are involved, that we center the child and give the child everything they need to be successful. That's what I'm saying.
These are great responses, and I just want to say, Fatima, that this is not a theoretical issue for me. I've got 3 teenage girls right now, so 18, 16, and 14, and a boy, bookend boys on either side. So when we talk about modesty at home, my first rule as a parent is that la ikrah fi din, right? I can't force anything on them. There's no coercion in matters of religion. So we talk about it. So we think through it, right? We talk about sexual objectification within our society. We talk about how do we want people to take us, what does it mean for people to take us seriously? And so one of my daughters was crying because the haram police on TikTok or somewhere were making her feel so much shame. And I said, look, God doesn't really care whether your kneecaps are showing or not, right? Let's not worry about God being angry because somebody's kneecaps are showing. Let's talk about the deeper concept of modesty, what it's for, what it's about. Let's think through it, right? And if you don't choose this for yourself, it won't have any meaning for you. But at some point, we have to empower our students. I mean, obviously, some of us run schools where we have dress codes at schools, and even secular schools have dress codes, and so there is a level of institutional requirement and coercion, I guess, if I can use that word. But when it comes to transformative Islamic teaching, I think we have to empower people to really think it through seriously, and we need to think it through with them and remind them that ultimately it's going to be their decision, right? And ultimately it's not about a God who's up there just waiting to see somebody's kneecap so he can start writing hellfire tickets or something. No, it's that this teaching is given to us as a rahmah, as a mercy, right? And if we don't understand it, if we understand it as a coercive rule, then it's no longer a mercy, right? It becomes a matter of, and with at least with my kids, I don't know if it's just my family or if it's my bad parenting, but my kids, if they don't choose it for themselves, then if I force it on them, it's going to push them further away, right? And so what's really important is that no matter what age they are, we sit through and we talk through it, we understand what this is about, and then ultimately the decision-making agency is theirs. And I think when you talk about giving students what they need to succeed, the first thing we need to give them, I think, is that agency, that choice. And then they can say, okay, yeah, I want to learn this, or I want to do this, and then it becomes a totally different conversation than if I'm just, personifying an angry God who's worried about kneecaps visible. Then this is the best recipe for pushing my kids away from the deen. Right, and all I can say is that I think it's so important that we really empower the kids to think through it. And then it's not about what their mom or dad says or what we say, it's that this really makes sense to me. And I think that if the beautiful thing about Islam, and one of the reasons why I'm so confident and I'm so fearless about education, is that if people really study Islam, its beauty and its compelling power becomes evident. It just makes sense. Not because somebody forced me to do it, but just because there is an inner logic and coherence and dignity that it brings. As Rumi, again, another poet, sorry I'm always quoting poets, as Rumi said, who is glorified during your worship? You think you're glorifying God? Really? Subhanahu wa ta'ala, you think God needs your glorification? The person who is glorified in your act of worship is you. Because God gave you that prayer, not because God needs your affirmation, but because the prayer is glorifying you. It's raising you. It's ennobling you. So this was a gift, not for God's benefit. Not because God, again, has got tickets ready, hellfire tickets for who missed a prayer. If I miss a prayer, it's my bad. I lost it, right? So I'm the one who suffers, right? And so when we turn it inside out like that for our kids, I think then they realize, wow, yeah, I do feel better when I pray. I feel more relaxed. I feel like I don't feel so panicked. I don't feel so anxious. And they see that the prayer was given as for their benefit, not because God needs it. And modesty is the same thing. God doesn't need anyone's kneecaps to be covered, right? God gave us these teachings about modesty, and it's not just what we're wearing, it's how we interact with each other. Modesty is big. It's a big, big concept. And it's not just about, whose hair is showing or not. It's a way of living. And when we understand that, and our kids begin to understand that, then they can think through it and choose it for themselves. And when they choose it for themselves, then nobody can take that away.
My name is Munir Kurz. I actually come technically as a representative of Oak Park Muslim community, but I'm actually asking this question as a parent of a child who has Down syndrome. I don't know if this is a plea or a question to you, but I just want to share a brief perspective that I have as a parent of a child. I have 4 children, 2 of whom are in 5th grade. One of our children has Down syndrome, is in public education, is doing very well, mashallah, doing math and other studies in a general education classroom. However, our deficit with this one of our 4 children is in Islamic education. And I've found that in the Islamic schools, in our communities, various Islamic schools, the thought of teaching children who have other learning ways, because whether it's Down syndrome, intellectual disability, whether it's on the autism spectrum, we don't address it. We don't address it, we don't recognize it, and we feel that we're quote unquote doing them a favor when we have another classroom to the side and we're quote unquote teaching them their own curriculum. And so I ask as a plea to our community and also to you as leaders who are educating us today. How can we instill in our community members, and what do we as parents of special children with these disabilities, what can we do to help people understand that they're going to be adults who are Muslim, who need to still learn how to pray, who need to still understand who the Prophet was. And they still have character, good and bad character, that we need to teach. But I don't know, we're left with doing it on our own. And I ask, what can we do as parents and as a Muslim community?
Well, I think it starts with what you're doing right now, which is to tell that story, right? Let people know what your experience is like. Talk to people about how your child is being in some ways excluded and ostracized from the full depth and breadth of the educational experience. My other suggestion would be to partner with other parents who have similar concerns as you do. Right? You don't want this to be a fight that you are by yourself fighting. It's not a unilateral battle. You want to bring some people to the table with similar concerns. And I taught at Oak Park. I started my career there. So I understand the power of the parent voice there. I think if you surround yourself with other parents, similar concerns, I think you can begin to tell the story in a way that's going to compel action for folks to respond in ways that are going to be beneficial to your family.
The only thing I'll add is that I think that there have been some successes in this area with the nationwide now organization MOSIN, and with the work that Imam Umar Salaman is doing with MOSIN. So we are seeing some strides in that area, especially considering, you know, me coming from the subcontinent, where back home, if there is a special needs child, we don't even know about it because those children are hidden in a room, in a home where they don't see sunlight. And we don't even know they exist. So we are coming with that, you know, that bias, that mentality into this Western world, and having to shed those notions that we had, that those children need to be locked up in a room. So considering that, not that, you know, that should hinder any progress, that should make us work harder, but, you know, I am grateful for what is being done, and hopefully with people like you telling your story, we will continue to make progress in this area. Thank you.
Sister, I just want to thank you for that deeply challenging reflection and plea. I think when we talk about diversity, we have to, I mean, obviously, this society is just struggling with skin color, right? This society is just struggling with, are you like a member of my religion or not? So we're just beginning a conversation as a community and as a nation. But when we talk about spiritually, that deep concept, like we were talking about modesty, you know, diversity is big. And I think we need to begin our conversations about diversity with the fundamental premise or belief that God does not make mistakes. And if we can begin our discussion of diversity with that simple premise, that God does not make mistakes, then it means we have to make room at our tables, room in our curricula, room in our hearts for everybody. And we have to also understand that there is no mind, there is no soul, there is no person who is more precious because of, and to God or to the creation, than just because of a certain list of characteristics that we ourselves prioritize and pride ourselves in, or whatever else. But I think that fundamental premise is so critical, that we as a community, and I think, you know, your point is that as a community, this is one of the areas that we have not done well. And so bringing that story to light and other stories like yours to light was just so important to help us diagnose a growth area, an area that we really need to grow. Because when we you know, as long as we keep these things invisible and shamed or unspeakable in these falsely pietistic religious gatherings, if we're not going to be real, we're never going to grow. You know, if we're not going to be vulnerable in one another's presence, if we don't have that kind of courage to be vulnerable and in process and imperfect in one another's presence, we're never going to get better. And so our first commitment, I think, on this commitment to diversity is that premise that God doesn't make mistakes.
Assalamu alaikum. Abdul Rahman Amin. My background is I'm a surgeon, but I'm retired for the past 3 years. The other background that some of you know, that I have established one of the largest private Islamic school in the city, in the state, and in the country. Alhamdulillah, with success. I have learned a lot from our teacher this morning. It's a wonderful, opened my eyes to a lot of things. I just want to add a few minor things. Going back to 14th century, we know that education is a foundation, but how was education delivered to the community? It was through madrasa, through halaqat, through addressing the younger and the older and the parents. In the 20th century, the latest name I would recall Sheikh Mutwalli Sha'rawi. Most of you know who's Mutwalli Sha'rawi, Allah yarhamu. Sheikh Mohammad Kishk and Sheikh Safi in Syria. The first two in Egypt. The masjid around them used to attract tens of thousands of people. And this was delivered to the heart of the people. So it's not enough to deal with the child in the school, it's not enough to deal with the adult, it's not enough to deal with a small group. Education is multifaceted. Start when the mother nurses her baby. She sings a song for that baby and sing him an Islamic song and sing him in a very emotional way to raise that child and hug him until the separation at the age of maybe 1 or 2 or 3. Then the child would have to learn by example. And in my school, to tell you the truth, people respect me for one thing. Because somebody found me about a couple months ago and he said, well, what's your job here? He doesn't know me. I told him, look, it's my job to set the table when we have a function. Set the table when we have a dinner, when we have a meeting. Set the table and set the chairs. I just want to say, I never sat with my children to give them a lecture about what is correct and what's not correct. What is halal, what's haram. As you alluded to, is by example. By example. I raise children and I raise grandchildren. I'm a father and grandfather of more than a dozen. So the example at home, address it to the sister who is struggling with the modesty, an issue of modesty. A lot of these things, it comes from home. It comes from parents, come from auntie, come from uncle, come from the groups. And it's very important to have your son or your daughter be associated with the group. So you should know who is your son playing basketball with, who's your daughter going to the movie with, and how do they choose the movie, and how do they choose the scene on the internet. Of course, they have to get all electronic, they have to get all the computer, they have to get but it's Islam create police inside of you. If you can create that police who watch you, now why don't you cross a red light at 12 o'clock at night? Because you may think there is a police officer watching you in the corner. He's going to give you a ticket, he's going to flash you in a few seconds. So if you can create a police officer watching your heart since childhood, since infancy, that's a success of life. I've tried Sunday school. I taught in Sunday school for 10 years. I've been working with our school, Universal School, for 32 years. I've seen children going perfectly straight, and even children going astray too. So Islam is not one size fits all. It's not one size fits all. You have to tailor. You have to tailor your education. Education is a foundation to everything. Just like Professor Gianotti said, Islam started with Iqra. The first word was Iqra. And one of the saying that لا يزال الرجل عالما ما طلب العلم فإذا ظن أنه علم فقد جهل, just like what Dr. Gianotti said. Once you think you learn everything, you're an ignorant. So you continue to learn. And I'm learning. And as he said, he's still learning. And I'm learning today and tomorrow. And in my 70s, I'm still go and attend seminar, even seminar, medical seminar, although I'm not practicing, but I still want to learn. So Islam, I just want to summarize it. Islam is not one size fits all. You need to do it at home. You need to do it on the weekend. You need to go with your children skiing. You need to go with them skiing and see who they're skiing with, who they're playing basketball with, who they spending the evening with. You need to make a halaqat. You need to have a family gathering. You need to have a, you associate with whose wedding you go and what you do in your wedding. And so you need to educate your children. And we talk about the children, actually. So you need to be with your child 24/7 until he's separate from you, until he's married and out on himself. And one of my children, actually, we went to Umrah together, and he was observed. He was very close to me. We went to celebrate Mercy about 3 years ago. We went to Jerusalem, and then we went to Mecca and Medina. And we were about 50 people. So some people, my son was in charge of entertainment because he sang nasheed. He has nasheed tapes. This is not a commercial, but it's not a commercial. They have 2 or 3 CDs, and they established about 5 years ago when they were a group in California. So he was invited to go as an entertainer and make nasheed throughout the trip of 18 or 19 days. Anyway, so the people watched him and they say, your relationship with your father is different than all of us, and over what we see. What's your secret? What's your secret? And he said, my father used to be with us 24/7. When he's not in surgery, he dedicated everything for us. On a weekday, on a weekend, on night, on a homework, in a breakfast, in a trip, in a bus. When we go in my van to go on a trip, my father used to sing for us many hours. I learned to sing from him. So the issue here is you need to be watchful, you need to be committed, you need to give by example, just like the very same example. And thank you very much. Jazakumullah khair for your wonderful speech and wonderful day.
I'd like to thank our audience members for their beautiful stories and their insightful input. Finally, I want to invite Fatima Siddiqua from the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition for a quick announcement.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Fatima. First, I want to say thank you to the speakers. As a young person myself and my little brother, we're just listening and going, yes, yes, yes. This is exactly what we want to hear, and we want our elders to know about us. So I want to just wrap up with some actionable items and things that we can take away. We talked about building community. The first Muslims who ever arrived, our brothers and sisters from African countries who were enslaved, were the very first Muslims in America. And they built community in America. And because of the community they built, we were able to prosper now. So we built our communities because that's what we needed. And then we built our mosques because we needed a place to pray. And then we needed schools because we had to educate our children. And so the next step for us now is to build civic power. So, we probably don't talk about civic engagement as much. We're talking about Islam, we're talking about making sure our children, are growing up to be good Muslims, but we have to talk about civic engagement as well. So, mashallah, the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition, and I see a lot of our partners today, we, along with our partners, passed 5 huge pieces of legislation last year that benefited Muslim students and other people. So we had the first ever Muhammad Ali Day on January 17th. That's amazing. We now have a law that allows athletes in school to dress as they need to, dress modestly, so they don't have to participate in volleyball or basketball because they don't like to wear, they can't wear what their religious clothing is. So please check out that flyer for more legislation that we passed. And we have more bills in Springfield this year, so keep an eye out for those. And if you want to partner with us, please go to our website. But before I end, I want to say something that has to do with civic engagement and building civic power. We cannot do it without engaging young people. Absolutely not, right? A lot of the work that went into this was by college students, people who are in grad school, people who were on the floor who knew what was happening. So I ask you, in your organizations, please listen to those young people. In fact, bring them to the meetings. Bring them to the decision-making rooms and ask them what their opinion is. Because I ask leaders, community leaders and imams, and I ask them, you know, like, where is your inspiration? Why are you doing what you're doing? And they say, because we want to leave a world that's equitable and equal and, you know, with opportunities for everyone, for our children. That's amazing. But how amazing would it be if the people who are going to inherit that world get to shape it as well? So I ask you, please listen to young people. Please, you know, ask them for their opinion. Let them be decision makers. They're primed to be leaders. They're ready. They just need you as elders to have courage, encourage them, and to have faith in them and to really uplift them. So give your expertise, the experience, the knowledge that you have, and uplift your young people. We can do it. We are leaders. I'm a voter engagement coordinator, and I started as a young person. I mean, I am a young person still, but like I was 19 when I started, and I was an intern. And the coalition that I'm part of, they sent me to congressional debriefings. I went to the senator's office myself, and I told them, "This is the Muslim community. This is what we're doing. This is what we need. Can you help us?" And then now I'm leading our voter engagement efforts. And I want to just, this is another note that I wanted to tell you, is that we were able to get this legislation passed because we had allies in office. We had friends of the Muslim community who listened to us and said, you know, what you want is important, we're gonna pass it, we're gonna try our best. But wouldn't it be even better if we had Muslims in office and we didn't have to negotiate because they know what we want and they listen to us? So, you know, I probably see reps around me, future senators, or, you know, at home, you know, at your house, you probably have a future senator, or you have a future representative, or a future president. We don't know. But what we can do is to train them and uplift them, give them the expertise, and really equip them to be leaders. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate it. Join the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition as a partner. Thank you.
You are going to be next senator?
We don't know yet. It's law school for me right now, but please support me in the future. My name is Fatima Siddiqua.
Thank you, Fatima, for your message. You have my vote, that's for sure. I'd like to, because we're closing the event right now, we're running out of time. It's been wonderful. I'd like to thank our speakers and our organizers, the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition, the American Islamic College, and the Islamic Society of Midwest. For the last time, I'd like to remind everyone of the flyers. Meet your Muslim neighbor. If you haven't filled it out, please do. We're going to collect them. It's a wonderful program. And I'd like to invite Muhittin Ali Savar and Radwan Uysalar to the stage to present the gifts. A round of applause would be nice. Also, we still have the Eber, the modeling art. If you want to still stop by and check it out, please do. Because you may never get the chance.